I'm now going to review some 4x4 books. It's a bit of a challenge for me because I've written 15 of them. So I need to compare my own work with other people's work. But what I'd like to share with you are the books that I learnt an enormous amount from when I was starting out. And the amazing thing is that even today, I'm still learning an incredible amount from some of the new books recently come onto the shelves. Well, these are they. These are the books that have affected my 4x4 life for the past 30 years. These are mine. I wrote these. I started in 1993 with this one. It was modelled on a book that I read by Jack Jackson. I think I've got it here somewhere. There it is. This book, I really modelled my book on this one. Jack Jackson, the four-wheel drive book. In fact, you can even see the back of the two books are not dissimilar. A lot of what I wrote was based on what I found in here. But I was a bit frustrated by this book because after a period, I realized that there was quite a bit of stuff missing in that book. And in fact, I remember my very, very first trip. It was very deep sand, and I knew nothing about lowering tire pressures. Because, of course, in those days, there was no internet. There really was very little information about four-wheel drive. Jack Jackson was the very first one I found and read. This book is Unashamedly Landrover. That was my very first four-wheel drive. By the time I wrote this book, that was my vehicle. It was a Land Rover Defender. Well, it wasn't called a Defender at the time. It was called a 110. Became known as the Defender. It had a Rover V8 engine in it. And it was from a perspective of South African travel and South African vehicles, South African overlanding. And, well, to be honest with you, if I look back at it now, I have fond memories of it, but I also, there's quite a bit in it that is actually not very accurate. I've learnt a great deal since I wrote this first book, and this was South Africa's very first 4x4 book, and it became a bestseller, and it stayed on the bestseller list. I think it hit number 3 non-fiction bestseller, and it was there for about 4 months, and when that was taken off the bestseller list, it was replaced by this one, our first where-to book, the complete guide to 4x4 trails in southern Africa. That came out in 1994, sold almost double the amount of that book. So people really, really wanted to know where to go. So those two books were the foundation of the 4x4 information industry in South Africa. I started 4X Overland, at the time it was called 4X Forum, or 4x4um, in 1996. And that was one of the world's very first dedicated 4x4 websites. So that was what I was doing at that time. I was creating this industry in South Africa, 4x4 information industry. And of course the magazines soon followed, and it today is a totally different picture altogether, with lots of really good websites, great magazines, lots of information. There's no difficulty in finding good information at all. My third book was this one, and this one was an interesting one. And in fact, I actually had a look last night on eBay, and there's a couple. This one's for sale on eBay in England. The Ultimate Guide to Four-Wheel Drive in Southern Africa. In essence, it was actually a combination of those two books, and we did it for the CNA. CNA being a large bookstore chain in South Africa at the time. They were very progressive. They had a thing called Red Band Books. This is one of their books where they would produce large quantities, sell them at good discounts, and move large quantities. And they were sold, 8,000 were printed, and they were sold in something like 7 or 8 weeks. And they never reprinted it, strangely, but that's typical CNA, the way they work. From my experience in that company, their organizational skills right back in 1995 when this done to today are hopeless. We had a book, and it was I don't have a copy of it here. It's one of the very, very few that I don't have a copy of. A loose-leafed folder on 4x4 trails that we would update every year. It was the top-selling non-fiction book over Christmas, and that would have been about 1999-ish. Their top-selling book. and we printed 5,000, and they took, I think, 2,500. They were all sold, but 5 were still left in the warehouse, and they never replaced them and never reordered, because they said, well, we can't reorder because we've got some in stock. All of the stores were always ordering more than 5. They were ordering 15, 20, 30 at a time because they were such a good seller. So there was this fight between the warehouse saying, no, we've got stock, we can't order a reprint, and the stores saying, but we want more books. Nobody had actually ordered the exact amount for them to run out perfectly, because if you order one over more than they can supply, then they say, we can't supply any. It's that dumb. That's the history of CNA. The books that did extremely well, and I'm very proud of them, these hardcover books, they were, I think, probably amongst my best writing work. And you can see here there are quite a few of them. 2000 edition, that's the 1999 technical guide edition, that was a Trails book. And in fact, as a result of those, we did this for Toyota South Africa. That was the launch of the Land Cruiser 100 series, and this book came out to coincide with their launch of that vehicle. And we basically took the best of our other books, put it together in the same format, and produced, if I remember, 5,000 of them for Toyota. They took the whole lot and they gave them away with new Toyota four-wheel drives. And that was one of several books we did for Toyota over the years. We did another one down here somewhere. There's a book. Here was the other one we did for Toyota several years later. One of my worst cover designs ever. It's terrible. Anyway, we did it for Toyota. Don't remember how many thousand they took, but it was basically a where to go four-wheel driving in southern Africa, and it was a dedicated publication for Toyota South Africa. We even did, and I can't remember what year this was, an Afrikaans version of the technical guidebook, and it was a failure, to say the least. Even the Afrikaans bookstores didn't want it. Die volledige gids tot veertrekry. I think we threw away more books of that by far than any other book we ever printed. It was the only thing here that we did that was actually a bit of a flop. We did an edition for the UK market. I think I've got a copy of it here. Yes. This book, Technical Guide, was actually built, listen to me, I'm thinking about vehicles, published for the UK industry, and 1,000 of them were brought into the UK and sold over the next 2 or 3 years. And that would have been about 2005-ish, something around there, that book. Very proud of that book too, because it has a lovely, books have a lovely feel about them. We used really good quality paper and good quality card, and had a great advert, double page spread from Land Rover. But it wasn't, unlike my earlier books, not biased towards Land Rover, because by this time I was driving Geländewagens. I had a taste of Land Cruiser. I'd had a Land Cruiser loaned to me for a whole year by Toyota South Africa. So I had much more experience of many more different makes and an understanding of the differences. So it was not biased towards Land Rover. I think it was probably I tried my best to make it very neutral and down the middle. And I think I succeeded with that one. Of these books now, I must actually mention this. This was an interesting exercise. We were offered a lot of money. Again, don't know what year this was, 2003, 2004-ish. Technical guidebook with a Mahindra on the front cover. Big mistake. They offered a lot of money, and they took a double page spread inside, this, that, and the other, and the cover, and they had launched the Scorpio. And I thought, well, it just shows me. And in fact, I consulted with a few people, and they kind of agreed with me, but maybe they just were being nice. Suggested that it would show that I was very diverse, driving all these different vehicles and things like this, to put a Mahindra on the front cover. It was a flop in the sales, in the shelf, because people couldn't take the subject seriously if there was a Mahindra on the cover. That was an interesting thing that I've learned. You've got to have a very well-known, well-respected vehicle on the cover for the book to be considered well-respected. This was the last paper book that I published since this came out in 2012, and it is still available off the shelf in South Africa and on the internet in the UK. It is available worldwide on the internet as a digital purchase, and it's free. The non-interactive digital version is free. And the address, if you click that thing down below me now, you can go directly to the website. You just have to register, and you can have it for free. 320 pages, full color, and it's a very, I think, a very good book, particularly if you're starting out in four-wheel drive. It's not as if you're reasonably advanced that you won't learn anything, but I think the way it's laid out, the subject matter is very, very good for beginners. And of course it's free, so you can't lose, can you? These books have been my companions, and the reason why I thought about doing this thing about books now is that I've recently been thoroughly enjoying this book, Chris Scott's Overland Handbook. I haven't enjoyed a 4x4 book this much in a decade. I'm absolutely love it. I'm going to get back to that in a minute. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the books that have meant so much to me through the years. My favorite still, you know, sometimes a book can just be part of you. This is the one that it is. Graham Robson and the Range Rover Land Rover. It's actually got more about Range Rovers than it is about Land Rovers, and in fact it's got this lovely cutaway in the... Now, when I wrote my first book, I was mad on Range Rovers. In fact, I was obsessed by them. There is no better word than the fact that I was obsessed. And so to have a book, and I remember actually buying it in the C&A. Amazingly, that in those days they had a really good selection of books. Today it's just popular books, nothing more. They had a really good selection of books, even something as niche as the Range Rover Land Rover. That is still an absolute favorite. Talking about Range Rovers, if you wanted to get a book that, if you're a Range Rover Classic fan, as I am, the new ones interest me far less. That is absolutely the complete story by James Taylor and Nick Dimbleby, the complete story of the Range Rover, and basically it's the Range Rover Classic. It is a stunning book. Wonderful pictures, anecdotes, stories about its developments, and photographs of its... It's fantastic, particularly if you've owned one. Particularly if you've owned an old one. Absolutely wonderful, wonderful book. These two probably are my two most treasured books of all my books, actually. So anyway, what else has... If I look through my collection of books, I'll put Tom Shepard aside for the moment. If I look through my collection of books, more Range Rovers, Jack Jackson's Update, much better than the old one. Range Rovers. This was a great one. I remember, this is Jeeps, Buyer's Guide to Jeeps, quite old. And I remember using it as research material for my very first book. And of course, these publications, Brooklyn's book publications, Land Rover, 110, Range Rover, look at that. They put a really, really ugly Range Rover Classic on the cover. I mean, really, come on. You must put out a classic. That's better. A Range Rover Classic. So those are all Range Rovers, and of course there was one here which was all about Land Rovers. I have a Land Cruiser one as well, but it's not in this pile. I have a Toyota Land Cruiser one as well. Anyway, so these are the books that shaped my life and helped me write my books. Those that are helping me more still are these books here. You probably are, many of you will know this book, is Tom Shepard's book and Tom Shepard's other better book. Now, I want to talk about this one and Chris Scott's book. This is very, very technical. Sometimes I felt when I first read it, too technical. Now I'm going through it again and I'm finding I understand so much more of it. And at the time when I first got it, which is, I've had this book at least 20 years, if not more. I don't know. I remember exactly. I found it very technical, and I found it a little bit overwhelming at times with some of the technical stuff. But it has a huge amount of information, very in-depth, very technical, and if you are an advanced overlander or wish to become one, then there are few books as good as Tom Shepard's Vehicle Dependent Expedition Guide. Outstanding, outstanding piece of work. It really, really is. Not an inexpensive buy, but if you're keen on overlanding, that's fantastic. Now, this one, Overlanders Handbook. My books have all been written from a kind of an African perspective because I lived in South Africa and almost, not all, but almost all of my overlanding was done in southern Africa. You must forgive the noise. I live in Lincolnshire, underneath the general flying area for Scampton. They do training. Coningsby, they have fighter jets. Mildenhall, they have American, even noisier fighter jets. And there is noise. Anyway, I digress. The Overlanders Handbook, unlike my book, is written from a world perspective, or certainly a UK perspective. This is, you know, it includes travel, which mine doesn't at the moment. But it includes overland travel to places like Asia, South America, North America, and Africa. It's written from a perspective different from mine. So one of the reasons why I'm enjoying it so much is because of the Patreon campaign and the fundraising campaign and things that are happening to the 4X Overland website. My eyes are now opening and the opportunities are coming up to do some amazing travel in Asia and South America. And as a result, I need to know more about those places. This book is delivering. If I had to give a broad overview and recommend a book for you to buy, I would say this. Get my book first. It's free. If you are a beginner, it may very well be enough for you. There's an enormous amount of information. It's highly comprehensive. It's very easy to read, easy laid out. There's good anecdotes, there's good stories, there's good advice, and basically all that I have learnt over the many, many years compiled into that book. And it's free. I think I've said that before. If you're fairly advanced, you've done several trips and you want to go further and understand more in depth, Tom Shepard, excellent, or Chris Scott. For me right now, Chris Scott is perfect because not only am I looking to learn more, I'm particularly looking to learn more about traveling in specific areas outside of Africa. And I must say, Chris's work is fantastic. If I make a comparison to my book, I have a chapter on vehicles which will give a very, very broad spectrum view of vehicles, four-wheel drive vehicles. I, like him, have also limited my vehicles. For example, my vehicles will exclude soft-roaders. I'm not interested. If it doesn't have low-range gearing and reasonable clearance, I'm not interested. It doesn't qualify as an off-road vehicle. So, well, what is it? What's a crossover? It's an SUV. I don't know what they call them. It's not a four-wheel drive vehicle, really, is it? So I've excluded them. My perspective from my book when it comes to vehicles is about four-wheel drive and overland. Chris's perspective is overland only. So his list of vehicles is very much smaller than my list of vehicles. However, he has narrowed it down, because he's narrowed it down to overland vehicles, all his vehicles are referred to as good, bad, or reasonable overland vehicles. And then he goes into much more detail with those vehicles. So he will talk about Land Cruisers, for example, which ones are the good ones to buy, which ones are the ones to avoid, which ones are very popular, which ones are less popular. The difference between a 78 and a 75, excuse me. Likewise with Land Rover. It's not a specialist Land Rover book. There are many specialist Land Rover books that if you were wanting to understand in-depth information about Land Rovers and which one to buy, I probably wouldn't buy this one. But I would consider buying it if I was thinking about buying a Land Rover specifically to go overlanding. And that's the beauty of Chris's book. So I am thoroughly enjoying it. I'm reading it almost cover to cover. In fact, it's been so intense I've been dreaming about it, and it's actually been a little bit disturbing. I'm only that much the way through. So, as I said before, the reason for this little foray into my book history was because of Chris's book. I think it's great. I highly recommend it. And I think that is all I have to say about that.